The Canon R8 is here and it's incredible. If you picked up one of these cameras, you're in the right place. Today we're going to go over the best settings for the Canon EOS R8. Let's dive in. What's up, it's Feliciotti, and now the first thing I recommend you do when you get a new camera is write down the serial number. Now on the Canon R8, the serial number is located on the bottom of the camera, and you can easily register that on Canon's website. You'll never know when you need this number, for example if your camera gets stolen or you need to do a repair, so it's good to write that down. Now the next thing I recommend you do is to charge the included battery, and after charging that you can just pop it in the bottom of the camera here. And I should also note that the SD card slot is located on the bottom of the camera. If you don't have an SD card yet, I'll include a link to SD cards in the description of this video. Next, you'll also want to check if the camera has a firmware update. This is a pretty simple process. It just involves dragging a file onto your SD card, putting it in the camera, and selecting firmware update. Now that we have a fully charged battery, an SD card in the camera, we can finally get started. Now, I'm going to split this video up into two sections: photo settings and video settings. So first, I'm going to start with photo settings. So if you're interested in video settings, you can just skip to that part of the video. So before we get started on photography settings for the Canon R8, you're going to want to make sure that your camera is on photo mode and that you're not on auto. If you're on auto, the menu will be limited and you won't get all of the options we're going to go over here. Now that our R8 is in photo mode and not on auto, I'm using P for program, we can hit the menu button on the top left of the camera to dive into the menu. Now the first thing we're going to change is image quality. By default, this is on JPEG, but we're going to change it to RAW. Basically, RAW images give you more flexibility while you're editing. So if you're not actually planning on editing any of your photos, you might want to leave this on JPEG, but serious shooters are going to want to change this to RAW. So we're going to turn on RAW and turn off JPEG. Now next, we're going to go to shooting menu number 2 and go to ISO speed settings. And in this menu, you can see minimum shutter speed, and you can see on the bottom slower or faster. Basically what this affects is if it's going to use a faster shutter speed and lower apertures and higher ISOs, which I prefer because I notice sometimes photos can come out a little blurry by the default setting. So I like to change this to auto 1, and you can see here it's moving the dial up 1 notch there, and hit set. So basically when you're using auto, it basically will prefer a slightly faster shutter speed so you can get sharper photos. Next, we're going to hit menu here and we're going to go back, and you can see auto image optimizer, and by default this is on standard, but we're going to turn this off. This setting mainly affects JPEG images, but it also affects the raw previews. So basically all it's doing is affecting the preview of your image and overall going to affect the way you shoot. So it's better to keep it off if you're shooting raw. Now we're going to go over to shooting menu number 5, and you can see high ISO speed noise reduction. So we're going to go in here and change it from standard to low. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to use less noise reduction when you take your photos, because you can always add that later in Lightroom. So we're going to keep it on low. Also in shooting menu number 7, you'll see release shutter without card, and by default this is on, but we're going to turn it off. What this does is it allows you to actually take pictures with no memory cards in the camera, and there is absolutely no reason to have this on, because all it's going to do is it's going to end up making it so you forget a memory card, so it's better to turn that off. Now we're going to go over to shooting menu number 8 and go to customize quick controls. Now what this is going to do is it's going to let you select items on your quick controls, and the quick controls are the things that pop up when you hit Q while shooting. So while you're shooting, there's actually a bunch of options available while you're shooting, so you don't have to dive into the menus, and this option here lets you pick what's on that menu. I actually like what's on there by default, but it's really good to know what is here, because for example, if you're more of a studio shooter, you probably want to turn on some of the flash settings. If you want to add something, you're going to have to turn off something up here, and then you're going to have to add it down here, as you can see here. Overall, a really great option, and I'm glad they added this to the cameras. Also in shooting menu number 8, you'll find image review, and here we can select how long images show up after you take a photo. So once you take a photo, by default it'll pop up for 2 seconds so you can review it. Now if you're a more experienced shooter, you might want to turn this off, but if you just want to keep your photos up so you can really inspect how they look after you took them, of course you can keep it on hold or keep it on 8. I like to keep it on the default 2 seconds, but it's good to know where this setting is. Now in shooting menu number 9, we're going to go to shooting info display. And then we're going to go to screen info settings, and here you can change the different settings that you cycle through when you're shooting. By default there are 5, and I just find this to be overwhelming. I like to turn off number 5 and turn off number 1. This way you kind of get a view with all the settings that you have available, a view with like a lot more options, and then a clean view, and I just like that out of the box. Of course, this is going to be up to your preference. Also on shooting info display is the setting to add a grid on grid display. So a lot of people will like to do 3x3 to do the rule of thirds. Of course, up to your preference. I like to do by 3x3, but there's a few options there for you to pick from. Also on the shooting info display, you can do the histogram display options. Now the histogram shows you the brightness levels throughout your photo, and by default, it only does brightness and not brightness of each color. So if you want more data, you can actually change the first setting here to RGB. And then you can also change the display size to small. By default, it's very large on the screen, but changing it to small makes it a lot more manageable while you're shooting. Also in shooting menu number 9, you'll see display performance. By default, it's on power saving, but if you shoot a lot of fast moving subjects, you're probably gonna want to change this to smooth. Now, basically what this does is it controls the FPS of the screens. By default, I think power saving is good for most people, so I like to keep it on that. Now, also in shooting menu number 10, you can pick the movie recording settings. So these are the settings that it's gonna default to when you hit the record button, so it's good to know where those are. Of course, I like to shoot 4K. You can pick 24 FPS or 30 FPS. Those are pretty good settings for a lot of beginners. So now we can dive into the autofocus menu. You can see here the first option is autofocus operation, and we have the options to do one shot, AI focus, and servo. On most Canon cameras before this, there were only the options to do one shot or servo. Basically, one shot is while you're holding the button halfway down, the field of focus stays static, and you can hold that button down halfway and then move, and the focal plane will stay the same, so your focus won't move. Servo is good for like a moving subject, like somebody walking around or a pet, because the focus is going to need to change with that subject as they move. But they've added a new mode here called AI focus, which I think is pretty clever. It kind of mixes both of these. It seems to start on one shot, and then if a subject moves, for example, if it catches someone's eye and the subject moves, then it switches to servo. So it's kind of a good mix for a beginner who doesn't really know what setting they want to be on. Also good to know in this setting is subject to detect. Now there's an auto setting, but if you're shooting a specific thing like cars, animals, people, you can select that here. So it's just good to know where that is. Now also in autofocus menu number 3, you can see we have AF assist beam firing. Now what this is it's a little light that turns on from the front of the camera when there's not enough light. Now this is good for a lot of situations, but I've just found personally it can be really annoying to pop on a little light, especially if you're in a low light situation. So I like to turn this off. Also, another interesting setting here is the preview AF, and you can enable that if you want. Basically, it'll show a little highlighted area on subjects that will show you where the camera can lock on if you want. It's kind of hard to explain, but it kind of gives you guidance on what is available as a subject, and it has a little gray outline on a subject so you can see, oh, I can lock onto that person. On autofocus menu number 4, you'll find touch and drag AF settings. And as you know, the Canon R8 doesn't actually have a joystick on the back, which is one of its downsides. But what this setting does, it basically makes it so that your screen acts as a joystick. So when your eye is in the viewfinder, you can actually drag your finger across the screen and move your focus point. It's definitely a cool option and a good way to get around the limitation of having no joystick on the back. So we're going to enable that here. Also in autofocus menu number 4, you'll see limit AF areas. By default, there are 8 autofocus modes, which can be a lot to cycle through. So if you don't use a lot of them, it's best just to turn them off. I personally only like to have on spot AF and whole area AF. Also in autofocus menu number 5, you'll see MF peaking settings, and we're going to turn that on. Basically, MF peaking means when your camera is set to manual focus, it'll show a little outline on what is in focus. It makes manual focus a lot more fun and a lot more usable. It just shows a little outline on everything so you can quickly see what's in focus. And the best thing about this setting is it only turns on when you switch to manual focus. Now we're going to go over to playback menu number 3, and here you can see magnification. And in the magnification setting, by default, when you're reviewing your photos, when you hit the little magnify button, it goes in 2 times. I like to change this to actual size. Of course, this is up to your preference, but using actual size will make the image go all the way into its full size so you can instantly tell if something's in focus or not. Just makes it easy to pop in and not have to actually zoom in and out or deal with a bunch of settings when you're reviewing your images. In playback menu number 4, we're going to go to playback information display, and by default, when you're reviewing your photos, there's a bunch of different menus that you can cycle through. A lot of useful information, but a lot of these probably won't be relevant to you. They're not really relevant to me, so I recommend turning a lot of these off. As you can see here, there's a lot of extra menus that are unneeded. It just makes it a lot easier to cycle through your settings while you're reviewing your photos. Also in playback menu number 4, you'll see highlight alert, and we're going to enable that. Now what this does is it'll add a flashing black and white area when an area of your image is overexposed. When you're shooting raw, it's a lot easier to pull your shadows up than it is to pull detail from overexposed areas. And basically the highlight alert will show you areas that you can retain no detail from. So this is great if you're shooting a really dynamic scene with like a bright area and a dark area, and you see that flashing white area, you'll know I won't be able to pull any detail from this area, so you can adjust your exposure. Now in the network menu, I really recommend spending time here and setting it up to work with your phone, because the time that you're going to want to need this, you don't want to be fumbling in the field dealing with the settings and things like that. So it's best to set this up so you're ready to go. Also, if you're not using the Wi-Fi setting, I recommend going to the connectivity tab number 2 and turning airplane mode to on. This will just save you battery life and you don't have to deal with Wi-Fi or anything like that. But of course, you're going to need to turn this back off if you want to use the Wi-Fi on the camera to get images off the camera wirelessly. Also, this is a good thing to know is setup menu number 1 has the option of format card. Now basically what this does is it deletes everything on your memory card. This is just a good thing to know where it is, because every time you export your photos, you probably want to go in and delete all your photos off your SD card. Also in setup menu number 1, you'll see auto rotate, and I like to turn this just to on computer. Now basically what this does is the camera by default will rotate your image as you're looking at the back of it, which can just be a little disorienting. So definitely play around with that setting, but it's good to know where it is, and I like to turn it on to just on computer only. You're also going to want to turn on the add rotate information for video, so we'll enable that there. Basically, if you're shooting a vertical video, it'll just add that information in so the computer knows the video is vertical. And then setup menu number 2, you'll see mode guide. Now this setting is good for beginners. Basically every time you switch a mode on the camera, for example from auto to program, a little menu pops up and just describes the mode. But anybody familiar with their camera is not going to want this on, so we'll disable that. The same with feature guide. Feature guide just shows you what each option is in your quick control menu. So while you're navigating through the quick controls, it just shows you a little bit about each setting. But if you know what they all are, you definitely want to turn that off as well. Also in setup menu number 2, you'll find beep. Every time that the camera focuses, it has a little beep. By default, it's on, and you want to just turn that off, I recommend. And then in setup menu number 5, you'll find copyright information. Here you can set your name and other details that will be written to the copyright information of your photo's metadata, which is useful for copyright and other things like that. Also in setup menu number 5, you'll see firmware, and here's where you update the firmware that we talked about earlier in the video. So after you load a file onto your SD card and put it in the camera, you can just pop into this menu and it'll actually let you update your firmware. Really simple. Of course, I also recommend going to the favorites tab and setting up your own favorites menu. Here you can select any setting in the camera and add it to a favorites menu. Personally, I like to add format card here, Canon log settings, things like that, things that I use all the time. Of course, this is going to be up to your preference, but it definitely makes your workflow a lot easier if you take a few minutes and sit here and actually set up things that you're going to use in your camera. So that's all the photography settings that I recommend on the Canon R8. Now that we've been over the photography settings, we can head over to video settings. And of course, you have to switch the camera to video mode using the dedicated mode switch here. And we're going to switch it from photo to video. And let's dive into video settings for the Canon R8. Now the video quality on the Canon R8 is stunning. When you shoot a 4K video, it uses the entire width of the 6K sensor and downscales it to make that video look extra crisp. So I highly recommend going here and selecting one of the 4K modes. I typically shoot in 4K 24 FPS, but you can do 24 30 FPS. Of course, this is going to be up to your preference, but I really recommend changing this to 4K. Also, if you're planning on using an external microphone on this camera, you're definitely going to want to go over to sound recording. And you can see by default, it's set to auto. Basically on auto, when you're speaking very low, the camera tries to increase its amp levels so it can pick up that audio. But when you have an external microphone plugged in, this basically just adds a lot of hiss and doesn't make the audio sound correct. So you want to go over here and change sound recording to manual, and then recording level, you're likely going to have to go, it's going to be probably 1 or 2 notches from the bottom. This is going to depend on what microphone you have. You're going to have to test a little bit, but if you're not getting good results with an external microphone, this is probably why, and you're going to want to play with these settings here. Also in movie shooting menu number 2, we're going to head over to ISO speed settings, and you can see here max for auto time lapse. So that's what little symbol is. It's kind of confusing because you can't really tell what that is, but I'm going to change this to 400. Basically, this is setting the highest ISO that the camera is going to go to during the time lapse mode. By default, it's a very high ISO. I find it very strange that it's not by default like 800 because you're going to be using a tripod and your camera is able to use longer shutter speeds. So it's definitely best to change this to 800 or 400 to get really crisp time lapse from the camera. Now in shooting menu number 4, you'll see Canon log settings. I like to turn this on Canon log 3 and I like to use the cinema gamut. And I also like to change the characteristics for more sharpness. Now if you start shooting in C log 3, you're definitely going to have to learn a couple things in your workflow, but you're going to get a lot better images out of this camera. If you're really into video and getting the best out of this camera, I really recommend spending some time in learning how C log 3 works, and this is where you turn that setting on. And in shooting menu number 7, you'll see zebras, and I'm going to turn those on, and I'm going to turn zebra pattern number 2 on, and I'm going to turn zebra pattern 2 level to 95. Basically what this does is it adds a little zebra effect on any area of your video that you're shooting that is about to be overexposed. This is a really important setting for when you're shooting C-Log 3 because during C-Log you're going to want to overexpose your footage, and if it's too overexposed you're not going to be able to bring that detail down. So the zebra thing is basically an essential thing if you're shooting in C-Log, but it's just overall good to know what areas of your frame are going to be overexposed while you're filming. Also, if you plan on using this camera as a webcam, you're going to want to go over to the setup menu. So let's go dive over there right now. And you can see in setup menu number 4, choose USB connection activity. By default, this is photo import, but if you want to use the USB-C port on here and use the camera as a webcam with no other hardware, you're going to want to go to a video call / streaming. Basically what this does is when you put a USB-C wire in here and plug it into a computer, it'll recognize it as a webcam with no software. Very cool feature. Of course, if you want to have the highest quality possible, you're going to want to use the HDMI option. So this might not be relevant to you, but this option for most people is going to give you great results. And that's it. We've been over all the best settings for the Canon EOS R8. I really think that this is a great camera, especially if you're trying to get into full frame photography. It's just like such an affordable package and a lot of features, and I hope you really enjoy the camera. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to B&H Photo for loaning me this camera. I buy all my camera gear through B&H Photo, and overall they're just such a great service. They provide quick shipping, and you know that you're not going to get a counterfeit battery or something like that, so I recommend them highly if you're looking for somewhere to buy a camera or camera gear. And thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you around.